What they need to do is say, look, we didn't wage this revolution. We don't want to lay people off. We don't want the messy job of deportation. But a task fell to us because what you people did was unsustainable.
Welcome to Undercurrents, our daily news show from Unheard's Washington Bureau. Today's special guest is Victor Davis Hanson. I'm so excited about this. First, just remember over at undercurrents.tv, you can join the Undercurrents community. You can get a special weekly newsletter from me and a private email address to contact us. Also, paywalled episodes of the show, including part of this one. So if you want to see the full interview, including some conversation at the end about the peace negotiations in Ukraine, make sure to go to undercurrents.tv and subscribe. Subscribe on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Now let's get on to the news. Donald Trump is officially 1 month into his second presidency, and it feels like it has been a year. Day one, then week one, saw Donald Trump attack decades of legislation, legal precedents, and government norms, amounting to a full-scale assault on the federal bureaucracy, from diversity, equity, inclusion, to foreign aid, to separation of powers. Much of this is now hung up in the courts. Republicans are working on major legislation literally right now, while they hold both houses of Congress, as well as the presidency. Trump helped negotiate a tenuous ceasefire in Gaza days before assuming office. He presented a shocking and unorthodox new peace plan for the region, and he presented a peace plan to Ukraine and Russia. So the right is giddy. This is decades of the conservative movement's policy work, often not taken very seriously by the Republican Party itself, suddenly being implemented almost all at once. The world's most powerful businessman is on their side. Border crossings are plummeting. Legacy journalists are losing plum gigs. Pop culture is shifting rightward. Many, though not all, public opinion polls are looking really good for the administration. Trump's bold cabinet nominees are mostly all in place. We are in the midst of history here in late February 2025, and I am just so excited to say that Victor Davis Hanson, author, senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, and host of the Victor Davis Hanson Show, is here now to make sense of these head-spinning times. So Victor Davis Hanson, welcome to Undercurrents.
Thank you for having me.
Want to optimize your metabolism? I found a powerful tool that helps. Lumen. Lumen is a handheld metabolic coach that measures your metabolism through your breath. The app shows if you're burning fat or carbs and provides personalized guidance on nutrition, workouts, and sleep. Just breathe into Lumen each morning. It reveals your metabolic state and gives you a tailored nutrition plan. Use it before and after workouts or meals for real-time insights into your body's fuel source. Your metabolism affects weight, energy, fitness, and sleep. Lumen helps optimize it. It even adapts to hormonal changes, helping manage energy and cravings over time. Take control of your metabolic health today. Visit lumen.me/undercurrents for 20% off. That's lumen.me/undercurrents for 20% off. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode. I want to start with a video that Elon Musk recently posted, actually of you, making this really important distinction between a revolution and a counter-revolution. And you've argued that Trump's first month back in office was very much the latter, very much a counter-revolution. It strikes me that one problem, though, for Trump might be how the media never accurately covered the actual revolution itself. And so it's wrongfully interpreting, as you point out, what's happening now as a revolution, not the counter-revolution. And I guess I wonder if this is sustainable politically, given that much of the public never had information about this sort of quiet revolution that happened, as you've written about, Christopher Caldwell's written about, and all of those things that happened slowly over the course of decades, and then pretty quickly during the Biden administration. Can that sort of political momentum be sustained given where the public is?
Not unless you have good communications. And by that, to be more specific, if Donald Trump is going to try to return 12 million people, which is the largest influx in a 4-year period in our history, even more than the great migrations of 1920 and 1880s, then he's going to have to explain that it wasn't his problem, that it's much easier to destroy the border and let 12 million people in than it is to do the hard work of in various iterations, getting rid of first the 500,000 known criminals, then the 1.5 million people who have deportation orders, then the next iteration, the people who are not working on public, et cetera, et cetera. It's the same thing across the board. And by that, I mean, it's controversial in the military to get rid of DEI. It's much easier to make a DEI program and to hire people. Everybody wants to be hired than to dismantle it and make the argument that it's contrary to military efficacy. It's much easier to borrow $2 trillion a year, as Biden did, than it is to borrow 300 billion or whatever they think they can get down to. And I don't think they've quite made that message yet, that we're countering something that was the most radical period in our history. And it's not easy to stage a counter revolution because you're cleaning up after the initial culpability. Carolyn Levitt had a good press conference in which she had Waltz, I think the National Security Advisor, and Stephen Miller on immigration, and then Kevin Hassert, and they all explained something that we're talking about right now. And it went very well, but they need to do that every week and say this was the task that was confronting us. And we could have either been lax or status quo and let it go on, but sometimes it won't go, it's not sustainable, and sometimes the chemotherapy can be as bad initially as the cancer. But they need to communicate that.
And actually, I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about that last point, how counter-revolutions, maybe in the past, not all counter-revolutions are obviously moral and just, but counter-revolutions of good cause, how can they go wrong? How could this one go wrong and veer off the rails?
Well, we don't have a good record in the United States because we have, insidiously, the government has always grown. So if you take the first one, and that would be from 1912 to 1920, the Wilsonian progressive movement, in which we created this huge civil service program, and we had a lot of surveillance about dissidents, and we brought in the U.S. income tax. The Harding and Coolidge restoration was not able to undo that. The next great revolution, I think, was the New Deal, especially from 32 to 40 in that 8-year period. It radically changed things. And then the restoration between 52 to 60 under Ike, he didn't try to undo that. Same thing with Reagan and Nixon. They came in after the Great Society, and Nixon kind of went along with it, with the EPA he created and all these other bureaucracies. And then Reagan tried to starve the beast. In other words, he thought that he would cut taxes and then maybe there'd be less revenue. But it turned out for the first 3 years, he was very unpopular. But then when they cut taxes and deregulated, they got this huge revenue increase in 84. I think the economy grew at 7%. But they didn't cut taxes, is what I'm saying. So every time a serious conservative administration has said, there's something that's not sustainable about the progressive idea of a huge government, high taxes, lots of regulations, and we're going to undo it, they don't, because it's too sensitive, that people would much rather be hired than fired and spin than cut. So this time they brought in an outsider, Elon Musk, and they thought he had this capital from all of his wonderful Renaissance things, and he could do it. We'll see, but there's no record of success that I can see in the 20th century or the 21st of scaling back the progressive revolution. Everybody who's tried it has failed, in my view, and that's why government each year gets bigger and more powerful.
I'm just wondering about Elon Musk as a person of such great power and influence right now, if there's any historical precedent, not just in American history, but in world history, for somebody with the political and, well, let's say power in both the private and public sector that he's wielding at this moment. Can we think of any other time where this happened?
Yeah, I think you can. There were people on both in American history specifically, I didn't think we ever understood to take one example, what Harry Hopkins was doing. He was an old New Dealer, but he had stomach cancer, or I should say ulcers. In 1941, after Pearl Harbor 42, he moved into the White House. He had no portfolio. He was a private citizen. And yet, when we look at this decision to arm Stalin and to the degree which we armed him, and to the degree which we sort of overlooked a lot of things the Russians did, killing 20,000 Polish officers in the Katyn Forest and not being able to talk about things like that. That was all made by Harry Hopkins. And he lived in the White House, as I said. He reported directly to FDR. And there were people at the time who said, this man has no portfolio. On the positive side, at the same token, in 42, December 41, 42, Roosevelt looked at the production levels and they were not going to make it. And he thought he was going to have a New Deal approach to rearming after Pearl Harbor. And then his Secretary of the Treasury, Morgenthau, and others said to him, it's not going to work. You've got to turn the economy over to I guess you'd call them oligarchs, the Elon Musk or the Jeff Bezos types people of the 1940s. And that's what they did. They created a war production board. They gave William Knudsen, the head of GM, Henry Kaiser, the head of Kaiser Steel, and Henry Ford, head of Ford Motor. And they just said, whatever you have to do, you go do it. You have eminent domain. And so Willow Run, they made a 1 million square foot factory, just tore up the landscape, made it. A year and a half later, they're making a bomber every hour. Same thing with Alameda. They just went in and bulldozed it and made an assembly line and Liberty ship every 3 days. But those three guys, they had no official. Finally, they made Knudsen an officer in the Army, but the others had no official. They were members, kind of like Doge, and they really won the war for us. And I think Trump indirectly, or maybe he has people who know that seems to be what he's trying to do with these oligarchs like Bezos and Zuckerberg and Andreessen, Horowitz, Musk, that he's won over to his side. He's trying to say on issues of AI, cyber, biotech, drones, hypersonics, all of these new fields we're losing to the Chinese. So I want you guys, whatever your politics are, to unite, and I will let you have enormous leeway. And we want to revitalize the space program. We want to get into the drone area of munitions and defense. And so I think the left misunderstands that, but he's trying to enlist private capable people and give them extraordinary abilities for the national purpose. But he's got to define that. And Roosevelt really did. If you look at his fireside chats, he talked about what William Knudsen was doing and what DuPont was doing and all of these companies. And they won the war. So the proof in the pudding is in the end. At the end of 1944, with almost a year left, the United States GDP was larger than all the other major belligerents in the war put together. And the United States fleet was larger than all the fleets in the world put together. And I think that's what Trump is sort of doing with Ukraine and these other things. He wants to turn these people loose and see if they can make the United States preeminent again.
Steve Bannon is warning that Trump could be kind of conquered by the oligarchs, by the Musk, the Bezos, the Andreessens. And he's like really concerned about perhaps undue influence by this circle. Tim Cook obviously just scored a pretty big win for Trump by announcing that he was investing more in Apple based in Texas. Some of that stuff looks really good on the surface. Is there a risk that Trump is the one who ends up being conquered by the oligarchs? Is Steve Bannon maybe over his skis right now and worried, much ado about nothing? It's clear maybe that Trump is the one that has been the conqueror, or could it still sort of swerve the other way?
The key here is, as we did this before, as I said, with World War II, there was complete transparency because the left during World War II said these people are going to make a fortune. And they were called the dollar a day boys. That was what the pro Roosevelt media called them. And so there was transparency that they were not allowed to make an inordinate amount of money. They supposedly worked for free, although after the war was over, obviously the Kaiser shipyards were in control of the Bay Area, and GM and Ford, that was the beginning of the big three that eased out all of other competition because they had these huge contracts, 400,000 trucks of the Soviet Union alone. So that's something to watch, but I don't think Steve sees that we're not operating in a vacuum. And by what I mean by that is, as you saw that Ross Douthat New York Times interview with Mark Andreessen, he said that one of the reasons he flipped was he talked to the Biden people and they told him that they were going to allow only 6 or 7 approved, I guess, ideologically approved companies to have a monopoly on AI. And they were not going to let startups get into it. And the more he talked to the Biden people, the more they wanted to have a state control of Silicon Valley. It's kind of like what they did in the 2020 election when they had the FBI partnering with the old Twitter and stuff. And he got that was like when in these interviews he's given and other people like him, it was almost as if they were attracted to it ideologically, but then they got scared because they saw what the left was going to do. And so when they went over and talked to Trump people, they got a very different reception. They said, we're going to work with you, but it's not going to be to pick and choose or to have monopolies. We're going to work with you in a different sense. What the problem with Biden was, he wasn't a nationalist, so he put you at the mercy of European censors or monopolies or unfair tariffs that were hurting you. And what we're going to do is we'll let you do whatever you want in the United States. We don't pick and choose. We don't care who does it, but all of our companies overseas are going to be protected in the sense that they're not going to be able to censor you. They're not going to have asymmetrical tariffs where you have to pay 5%, but their companies pay 2%. They're not going to interfere and put you on boycott lists. And that was very appealing to these people. And I think that's why, I don't know if they're flipped politically, but they have flipped into neutrality, I guess.
That example I find sort of frightening because there's even as like a limited government conservative, I look and I say there's a pretty decent argument for some type of industrial policy around artificial intelligence, generative artificial intelligence. And as you were describing the various counter revolutions, the steady growth of American government since, the founding of the country, especially over the last 100 years, it seems like that's happened all over the Western world. And I wonder if it's almost Sisyphean to fight the growth of government as these new technologies keep us so interconnected. And even with a very successful Doge, I sort of wonder if the temptations of this power, whether it's in the hands of people in the private sector, like an Elon Musk, or someone really powerful like a Klaus Schwab in the public sector, or someone who's at the EU. It feels very hard to actually stop the growth of government when technology gives government so much power.
It is because these technologies are a little bit different than the past. They're 360 degree, 24/7 holistic technologies. And you can see what happens when we partnered with the mRNA vaccinations. We were told that these were entirely safe by Anthony Fauci, that you would never be infected, nor would you be infectious. 2 shots in your hat. And then the more we learned about it, they were really genetic re-engineering mRNA vaccinations with creating spike proteins. And 90% of the time they were wonderful, but there were people with particular immune systems in which there was no way to control the production of the spike protein, and they had all sorts of serious problems. And the same thing is true of technology. So I guess what I'm saying is, as long as there's a generic national policy to promote our companies and demand that they're protected and I don't mean given an advantage, but they get parity abroad. So if the Chinese are cheating or they're using cyber attacks on our country or they have asymmetrical tariffs, and we say to them, you're going to treat Apple or Google or our financial people the same. But the idea of partnering with them, Operation Warp Speed, where and we had to, I suppose, but we got rid of all culpability or liability. We made them without any liable uh, exposure, and we really didn't know. In a normal time, I don't think anybody would have allowed those vaccinations unless you'd had a lot more testing. And the same thing. So AI is the same thing, and biotech. All of these are very dangerous technologies if they're not watched and somewhat regulated, and especially they're dangerous if any of them partner with the government in a way that we haven't done before. I can see we've outsourced things with the space program, and that doesn't worry me as much. But these new emerging technologies, I think what scared them was, as I said earlier, that the Biden administration wanted to enlist particular winners that were ideologically symmetrical with them or commiserate with them, and then punish the other ones or not allow them to or regulate them out of business. And they didn't want that. But by the same token, you don't want the Trump administration partnering with particular groups. You want an open system and free enterprise system of competition.
James Carville wrote in the New York Times very recently that Democrats should basically play dead and let the Trump revolution, or more accurately, counter-revolution, crumble under its own weight. And I was listening to your great commentary on the very tragic downfall of Joy Reid's tenure at MSNBC with the cancellation of her primetime show, The Readout. I'm curious what you make of how the left is responding to the first month of the Trump administration, the second Trump administration, because it seems to me, if you're sitting at the DNC headquarters, you're potentially looking at an opportunity to remake the Democratic Party into something that is populist in a way that understands how Trump appealed to people, given the influence of, billionaires, and Bernie Sanders is out doing his anti-oligarchy tour in Nebraska and Iowa. What have you made of how the left has decided to respond to this month of pretty aggressive action by Trump?
Well, I mean, the old adage, they've forgotten nothing and they've learned nothing, because the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We look at the Harvard-Harris poll. I think it came out yesterday evening. Donald Trump has still got positive rankings. Mark Penn had a poll out that was the Democratic. I think he used the term they're falling off the cliff. And what they're trying to tell us is that on all of the key issues, even if Donald Trump is blunt or crude or chaotic, or Elon Musk says one thing on Monday and Trump says another on Tuesday, the reason that they still have public support is most people, and sometimes a lot of people, in the case of transgenderism and boys and biological males and girls sport, it's 80-20. The border, do you want to close the border and deport people who are here illegal? It's about 60-40, even now with all the negative publicity. Do you want to put troops in Ukraine or keep the Ukrainian? It's 50-50, but more now it's about 60-40. Americans don't want to do that. And crime, the same thing, inflation. So Trump is on the right side of all these issues, and you would think that the Democrats might do what they have done in the past very successfully. When I was in college, George McGovern took the Democratic Party way to the left in 1972. He said that Humphrey lost in 68. Humphrey lost because he wasn't quite moderate. He almost beat Nixon, but he wasn't moderate enough. They said he was too moderate. So they were going to cut the defense budget in half, give $5,000 to every person. And they introduced racial quotas in the DNC, et cetera. And they lost in a landslide. And then they came back and they said, the only time the Democrats win is we have to get people with Southern accents. because we had LBJ had a Southern accent, and now we're going to have Jimmy Carter, and then the next it was Bill Clinton. But they saw that and Carter was left, but they thought they could pass him off as a moderate, but he turned out to be really a McGovern with a Southern accent, and that didn't work. So they lost another 12 years. And then they reacted. And if you go back and look at, I'm no fan of Bill Clinton, but from 92 to 2000, if you look at the Democratic National Committee charter agendas and those conventions of 92, but especially 96 when they ran against Bob Dole. And I think Doug Schoen and Mark Penn wrote it. It's pretty amazing. I was shocked when I read it the other day. It's close the border, legal only immigration, juvenile crime should be no excuse, violent juvenile criminals should be treated as an adult. We've got to balance the budget. We have to have compromise with budget cuts. The era of big government is over. And they won. I mean, even then they had trouble. They had to have Ross Perot in 2 elections to help them. But they did do that. And that was pretty successful. And the Republicans had not, as you know, won a popular vote since 2004. And they'd lost the popular vote 7 out of the last 8. But then Obama came in and he played like he was Clinton for the first term, but he went hard left the second. They took control of the party. The rest is history. And are they going to go back to a Clinton remedy? I don't think so.
See, this is exactly what I was going to ask you about next. Is like, I remember a year ago, the place that it felt like American culture was in is so different from what it feels like right now. It felt like, yes, there was momentum. The New York Times had started to report critically on some aspects of transgender ideology, and you'd started to see politically incorrect comedy make a comeback and have commercial success, and corporations get more comfortable getting rid of DEI programs, but nothing like what's happened since the election results came in. And I guess I wonder what happened to all of those like middle management millennials, people my age, who were militant leftists. Are they just now lying low? Are they like sleeper cells in all of our corporations that will be reinvigorated as soon as there's political momentum and success back on their side? Because I remember, a lot of people were saying this was like Weimar. This is the fall of the Roman Empire. And surely just an election result can't flip that switch off. So I'm curious what you make of where that...
It depends a lot on how the Republicans handle it. So I think the New York Post, I did a video about a week ago. New York Post had something today about what they can't do is they can't be triumphalism. And sometimes Musk will say, hey, we got rid of 30,000 today. That doesn't go well because it's 30,000 jobs are lost. Not all these people are evil people. They're good people. They just probably not, they're not productive in the way that would justify the salaries and their budgets. What they need to do is say, look, we didn't wage this revolution. We don't want to lay people off. We don't want the messy job of deportation, but task fell to us because what you people did was unsustainable. And we're going to try to deregulate. And when we get close to budget sobriety, try to cut taxes and try to build up this private sector with fuel development and mineral development, timber, and get back to building things and build up a big private sector so all of you can get back into the private sector. But if they don't do that and they just start bragging and boasting about how they're cutting and then they're going to get a backlash, obviously. If the Democrats are wise enough to be populist about it and not, so far, what have the Democrats done? They have focused on transgenderism, where they're losing 80-20 on the sports issue, and the population is 0.002 that are transgendered. And then they're talking about deportation. And how does that manifest itself? Here in California, we're going to expose all the names of the ICE people and their pictures on placards, or we're going to wave the flag of the country we don't want to go back to, but take over the 101 and block traffic and burn in front of everybody the flag of the country that we want to stay in. And that's what they're doing. Or you put Chuck Schumer or Hakeem Jeffrey or all this Garcia guy, and they're all screaming and yelling. That's music to the ears of Republicans. So they know what they have to do, but they're like an addict, and they need to get off this progressive woke drug and go into rehab and do a Clinton reboot. Like every addict, the remedy is worse than the disease for them at this point.
I have a theory I want to get your take on, which is that Democrats are going to continue to get questions about whether a man can become a woman or a little boy can become a girl, and they're not going to be able to answer that question honestly. We saw what happened with Seth Moulton when he tried to just have a little bit of dissension from the party line on boys and women's girl sports, like at the kids level, sports at the kids level. He had high-profile members of his staff quit. People started complaining about him. And I just think until Democrats can answer that question honestly, that'll be a litmus test in the minds of so many voters who just, even if they want to agree with them on kitchen table issues, have a hard time emotionally putting any trust in a politician that can't give an answer that sounds sensible to those questions. I'm curious what you make of how Democrats are going to be able to navigate this one narrow issue going forward.
No, you're right about that. And especially because if you look at the breakdown between 2020 and 2024, as far as Trump, he got about the same overwhelming so-called white vote, 58%, 57, maybe white males a little higher at 60, 61. He did about the same, a little bit better with women and youth, but where he picked up that 1.8 million that won him the popular vote was largely because the Hispanic vote went from about 40% to 45 or 46, and black males went from about 10 to 22 or 23. And that was about 1.5 million people. And why did they do that? It was partly the economy, but it was a lot of issues that are dear to the progressive left. And I can tell you, living in a community that's 95% Hispanic, the border was a big issue because all of a sudden in our schools in this area, we have gangbangers, norteños, sureños, M13, cartels in California, or no more AP classes. Now we have English of second language, and all employers are hiring illegals at cheap wages. So there's a lot of resentment on that issue. The same thing with the transgender issue. So what I'm getting at is a lot of these issues that the Democratic Party, that at least their bi-coastal professional elite thought were really important to them, are exactly the issues that are bleeding them in these constituencies that were their base and which have flipped over to Trump. The economy, but also immigration, transgenderism, price of gas, the minority support for the new Green Deal or whatever that is, or banning natural gas stoves it's a losing issue. And yet they keep this boutique Democratic professional class keeps thinking that if they scream about it or they yell about it or they call Trump a Hitler or a dictator, then people are going to come over to men and women's sports or open borders or more illegal immigration. And it's not going to happen.
Thank you so much for tuning in to catch the rest of this special interview with Victor Davis Hanson, where we talk about foreign policy. Make sure to head over to undercurrents.tv. You can get a premium subscription, just $1 for your first month. Subscribe here, wherever you're downloading your podcasts, wherever you're watching your videos, whether it's YouTube or Rumble. We appreciate your time. We'll be back here with more Undercurrents soon.